everything I always do is all about building the playbook for the athlete. Me and Aidan Roberts talk about this all the time. So I've been building his playbook for 7 years now. You know exactly how to tip all these dials at the right point in his training and his recovery, all of that. But you get to do the same in the movement pattern. You know, if a hold is slightly more open, then it requires this part of your shoulder to be worked slightly differently. You need to have your hips lower. You need to do this because you're not strong enough in this position. If it's in cut, you get away with so much more. You can fire yourself into the wall.
Welcome to the Testpiece podcast. This podcast is about all things high-level climbing. How to go from good to great. I'm your host, Joshua Horsley. I've been climbing for over 30 years. We recently updated our Patreon, and now you get exclusive content from the guests that you love. You get your episodes before everyone else, and they're ad-free. Try it out now at patreon.com/testpiece with a free 7-day trial. Okay, let's start the show. Ollie Torr, welcome to the podcast, man. How are you doing?
I'm great, thank you. Thanks for having me on. Really excited.
Ollie, I think this may be my longest podcast lead up. I don't know. We were talking for 6 months, 9 months. I don't know. Time flies, but happy to have you on, man. I've been looking forward to this one for a while.
Yeah, my apologies on that front. I've been delaying, haven't I? Delaying, promising to come on soon with news of other things happening. So thanks for your patience. I'm really psyched, and I love what you do with the podcast. So it's been a pleasure to kind of organize this. Thanks, man.
I love what you do. I was going to say the podcast, but then you just do a million things. Lattice is, it's your baby, and it just had its 10-year anniversary. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, that's right. This August, we did start it a tiny bit earlier, but in terms of officially Company's House in the UK, it's 10 years this August. And it's actually technically been nearly a third of my life, including the time before. So I definitely feel like I've put my 10,000 hours in now. So I'm pretty psyched to have got over that goalpost for me personally.
10 years. Yeah, I emphasize it because, this whole podcast always about good to great. And I think just the kind of meta thing is, you said, I've put in my 10,000 hours. It's everything takes longer than you think. And I'm sure those 10 years have been many late nights. It's not just putting in 10 years. It's every moment of that 10 years. So congrats, man.
Thanks very much.
So I think of Lattice as just being this juggernaut of training. I remember when you guys launched, but just for the 6 people that don't know about Lattice, can you just give us, the quick summary of what you guys do over there?
So yeah, we specialize in training climbers. There's a big team of us now. And we've pretty much tried to hit every area of climbing training that we can address in the industry, which is started with coaching, working with elite athletes, comp climbers. Then that went into all sorts of athletes, all sorts of ability levels, trying to address every single discipline. We made physical products. We've made an app. We've got sort of a development team. And then one of our big ethoses, and why probably a lot of people have heard of us, is we've always wanted to provide free and the best information possible for climbing training that we can do. So we've always tried to kind of done that as part of it's been part of marketing, but it's also from the very start, that's been a big message that we've tried to put out there. So we've kind of tried to address everything in training for climbers.
Just that, little tiny subject of training. I mean, actually training is maybe somewhat of a niche, and especially back when you guys started, but when you narrow something down like that, it actually is extremely broad. And I remember my friend first getting a Lattice assessment, and, it was probably about 10 years ago. And we were just saying, what do you mean? He's like, well, I went online. There's metrics. I bought a hangboard and tested myself. And I'm just kind of curious, how these assessments have changed from day one, to day, a lot more than one.
Yeah. So when we started, it was such a investigation into the unknown. And there were definitely studies out there, little university studies, which were amazing. It kind of gave us the starting position for me and Tom to kind of build from. And we had the Lattice board, which was up originally, which we were I think that was probably set us off because it was such a bold image kind of look. But effectively, we just kept building on that. We kept hiring and working with far more intelligent people than we are. And that's just brought another level of expertise. We work with around 3 or 4, maybe more universities every single year to do studies. That did slow down around COVID, but we've constantly been pushing that sort of research in the background. I went back to do my master's just so I could write up some of our data. And yeah, pretty much where we've got to now is the actual outputs are almost the same in terms of helping climbers decide where to put their energy in terms of training. But what it's backed up by with a huge database now of so much knowledge and data, that the key thing that we do is a coach is inputting into that interpretation, because we've always said from the very beginning, giving you a list of numbers saying that your strong, weak, or whatever is part one. That's just a tool in the toolbox, but it's the knowledge and interpretation of that and how you use it with people that really matters. And I would say that learning of behavior and understanding how to deliver this to people is probably one of the biggest things that's changed. And delivery of content is one of the things I've focused on so much in the latter half of that time period.
You guys must have the biggest data set in climbing then. I mean, I would assume that there's more climbers have been through the test that you guys set up than any other collection of data. I mean, I don't know how, I'm sure that's proprietary to say how many people you've checked in on, but I'm sure it's quite a few.
Yeah. And I think probably one of the biggest things we do have is the control over what that data is. Like when you look at, I've been privy to a lot of different data sets over the years in different sports and in climbing, and a lot of websites, they must have so much data coming in, but it's how clean that is and what the methodologies are. And because we've done very strict kind of routines, and we've allowed that to become less strict with different fingerboards, different positions. But again, that was on purpose. That was with design, understanding all the comparison data. So yeah, what we've got is a really big database. It's flipping hard to work with. And also probably the other side is the coached plan data that we have is probably more impressive, and currently is the thing we're just about to start leveraging, which is like we've got over 1 million years worth of training plan data in terms of climbers that have received a plan written by an individual coach who's an expert in coaching and delivered a 12-week block of training, which does edit over time. But every single block, that data has been recorded, the decision behind it, why the coach has done that, and the outcomes from that block, and a questionnaire before and after. So because we have a good coaching team, which are all experts, they all go through the same education system that we've created. And we've been doing this for 10 years. It's just built and built and built. So obviously every year, like we just did a coach catch up, which is like our education sessions every couple of weeks, where everyone presents controversial ideas or new ideas. We still bring in research from elsewhere and we question our practices, but then we put that into the plans. If we think it's worthwhile, we look at the results. And again, that goes into that data pool. So that's the bit that's really exciting, is we have the biggest intervention data pool, I think, in probably quite a lot of sports as well, not just climbing.
Okay, I just want to say this back to you because I want to make sure I understand. There's data from metrics where you test yourself on, say, a 20 millimeter edge, and it's just a very specific kind of test. But then you're talking about when coaches work with athletes and they're put through whatever the coach wants them to put through. And then you guys track that as well as questionnaires around that. So it's not just like, were your fingers strong at this date or not? It's all of it around it, which is really interesting. I also want to understand, like, when did you guys decide to track that? Because I just, when I think about climbing, well, we are a little fringe, and it's like you have a coach and it's like, go do this stuff. Maybe you write it on the back of a napkin. No one tracked anything. And just, that's a really interesting foresight that you had early on that could be used to, could create a database. And I'm sure you guys have some products coming out of that.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, it started from the original ethos of our testing, and maybe it's a little bit of self-preservation here, but when you dedicate so much time to working with an athlete, and originally it was sort of GB juniors, for example. So we've got junior athletes that we really care about, you get to know them on an emotional level, and you watch them, bust their ass all season, like training season long. They go to a comp and they pump out, they slip off, something happens. And like watching the heartbreak of that moment, or not sending a project for an outdoor climber, you feel that so much as a coach. Any coaches out there or parents will know, watching a kid try to perform and you just like, your gut is just wrenched. And first thing is, did we do everything we could? What went wrong? Why couldn't they do that? Why did someone else do better? And the reason why we started testing was to actually understand those answers so that we can go to the climber and say, look, you've improved in all these areas. You are making gains. You're moving in the right direction. This is either a one-off or we need to look elsewhere. Let's work together on this, and then start plugging all those holes, because anyone who's kind of failed at a goal will probably know how frustrating that is. And some people fall off the wagon because they don't know the answers. So that was why the foresight started. It was actually just trying to give our athletes some answers at the very start, and then, help them trust the process. And it's all about trusting the process. And then to your point, yeah, we have one arm or two arm finger strength days to just hanging on 20 mil edge, very basic, very boring, kind of how much weight can you hold? But then, for instance, I've just spent the day going through Erin McNeese's plan today for her this training season coming up. And I've just looked over the last 4 years worth of training, and I go, how much did I give her in November, December, January? What was the main composition of that training plan? What was the success of that? What happened with her fitness? What happened with her outcomes? How hard did I push her? How did she feel? And just being able to see those numbers year on year, I can see how hard to push athletes going up. I can see when maybe I've pushed them to the limit, and all that kind of knowledge just helps me make better decisions. And don't get me wrong, I'm not perfect, and no one's perfect. And I'm sure I'll make mistakes in the future, but I think just having that little bit of data to sit down with the athlete and back up is really powerful. So yeah, that's kind of where it's come from.
Yeah, I think that being able to see little wins along the way, like even if you didn't send your project, but even if just qualitatively you felt better on a certain hold or wherever the case may be, because just to go back to you having a 10-year anniversary, it's very daunting to start a business and then say, I'm going to be here in 10 years. It's like, oh, I got my first customer. Like, great. And so, yeah, well, I also just want to point out, I think that coaches are unbelievably important in climbing, and especially in youth climbing. I always take a moment for people who are out there being coaches, especially for the youth. It is such an important thing for especially kids. When I look back in my life, some of the most important people in my life were my coaches. So just wanted to remind you that what you're doing, very important, very, very, very important.
Yeah, I'd like to back that up as well. And I think I've actually had quite a few sessions talking to coaches. People have reached out for bits of advice and that sort of stuff. And it's flipping hard, man. Like, I've been bulldozed over in the past by parents. I've been, let down by teams. I've had the best trips possible with a bunch of kids that, aren't my own. And it's definitely the highs and lows. But I think one thing that I would really like to kind of put out there for coaches is, take time for yourself, because I've seen quite a few coaches burn out, particularly in the junior space in the last couple of years, and they just give and they give and they give. And fundamentally, like, if they do leave the scene, they will be remembered by the kids, but things move on pretty quickly. So I think to sustain your enjoyment of that process is like, take time for yourself. Don't give absolutely everything, and you will enjoy the process way more. I made the mistake of not doing that, but I've been lucky in being able to diversify. And I'd hate to see really good coaches kind of burn out and lose the love for it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of emotion when your athletes are out there and do have a foot slip, and you've watched them put their all into everything. And then, sport is sport. It's never guaranteed. And one of my big influences in my life was my gymnastics coach, and loved the guy. Just probably loved gymnastics because I loved him. And then he left. He was a graduate student and left and went on to, have a career. Actually, he came back to gymnastics like 20 years later. He was like, this is great. What am I doing? But when he left as a coach, I basically left gymnastics because, I had that connection. You build that trust. It's part of the journey. But lucky for me, he took me climbing before he left. And that's how I got into climbing. I think we may have that in common. Ollie, did you used to also be a mediocre gymnast, or couldn't help it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, I was 100% the same sort of gymnastics through and through. Unfortunately, I actually did not like my coaches, and I think that's probably why I left. I had these two Ukrainian coaches for a while that were very stereotypical Eastern Bloc, used to smack us around the back of the legs with a stick to do movements properly, but and did ballet for ages to try and get us in form. But I did gymnastics for a long time as a youth, and I did have a big gap in between. I say a big gap. I had a gap in between, but like probably the same as you, all of those things that translate to climbing, which some good, some bad, did actually stay with me because I'd hit all the right things at the right point as a youth. So there was definitely some translation there.
All right. I just want to say, I don't know if you were actually a mediocre gymnast. I was a mediocre gymnast. You're an incredible climber. So whatever you did in gymnastics, I'm sure you outpaced it in climbing. And yeah, gymnastics was a interesting sport that, especially back then, very different than climbing, where it was brutal. And my daughter's in gymnastics now, and there's this tone of the coaches. I don't know. There's just this seriousness, and there's a right way to stand and a wrong way to stand, and they let you know. But something that I am curious to hear from your perspective as someone who did gymnastics and then also coaches climbing is, in gymnastics, there is a right way to do each of these moves. When they say point your toes or squeeze your legs together, it's not just because it looks pretty, because it helps your swing or whatever the case may be. And I remember going into climbing and just being let loose, like get to the top of the wall. Good luck. And should I put my heel over my head? I don't know. Try it. And it makes me wonder if now in climbing and in coaching, maybe there's a little more rigor or technique is better figured out, but I just always am stunned by how climbing feels a bit open-ended compared to something like gymnastics, where there is a right way and there is a wrong way. But yeah, any thoughts on that? I know it's just kind of a random topic, but you're a gymnast, or you were a gymnast.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm not sure how you guys did it in the States actually, but say as a junior gymnast, we had the NDPs, which was like the national competition. And every year group or age group, you did the same routine. You could tweak things up, you could tweak things down, but you pretty much had to do the same routine. It was about execution. So fundamentally, you're being judged by a panel of 4 to 6 judges who are telling you there is a wrong way and a right way to do it. And they're watching 50 kids, 100 kids do exactly the same routine. So I think in the constraints of when we're growing up in gymnastics, and particularly for us as younger athletes, you did have to execute things properly. Then as you become older, the one thing that I think gymnastic falls down on is they put far too much weight on execution still rather than difficulty, because when you see those athletes that really push the difficulty, and maybe there's a danger component why they still do this, it's really exciting to watch. It's like watching skateboarding. It's like, wow, what are they doing right now? Yeah, maybe their leg opened up slightly. There was a slight bent leg, but I can't believe they've just done that. And that's a spectator sport. But there's so much tradition, and this kids are brought up through having to execute, that you're still doing it that way. Whilst climbing, the only result is whether the judge says you held the top hold for 2-3 seconds. They don't care about the rest of it as long as you didn't cheat. So it's all about outcome based in both of these. The interesting thing I find, and this is something I've thought about quite a lot, is when it comes to technical movements in sport, it's the same with physical, really. You have to pay your dues before you're allowed to be creative. And by that, I mean, it's the same with like art. Loads of people out there probably understand, they can imagine a painting. They'd love to be able to draw this painting. They've got this image in their head. And until AI was developed, They never had the skill set to actually put it down. And effectively, because they've not developed the techniques to allow them to be creative. And in gymnastics, if you can't hold a handstand, you can't do certain moves on the P-bars, you can't do giants on the rings, then you can't link sequences. Whilst climbing is actually the same, in the sense of if you can't put your foot on the hold properly, there is potential chance you could do a problem. But as it gets to the next harder foothold, you're not able to do it. And it's the same with finger strength, physical strength. If you can't hold the hold, you can't be creative with your movement and technique. So I think there is actually more similarities in the early stages of climbing technique development than maybe we give credit for. It's just that no one's addressing that.
That's interesting. And I got to highlight something you said earlier around the execution focus of gymnastics, which, yeah, you do this routine you've done 1,000 times and you might be able to chuck a triple backflip, but your coach says, no, it's not clean enough. You're doing a double. And that makes me think that, well, I guess I could argue that the spectating of perfect could be more fun than the wildness of chucking a triple. I don't know. That's subjective. But then it does make me think that perhaps people aren't allowed to be more creative and find new and different tricks because it's very regimented. So I just thought that was an interesting point. And then to go back to this idea of kind of, you need to have perfect technique, or you need to learn the basics. You need to walk before you can run. This is something that I often see in gymnastics, and I think it happens in all sports, is that when you're young, you're too weak to do things the wrong way. And it's something that was super hammered into me in gymnastics, because a lot of those strength moves that people see, yes, you have to be strong, but you have to be able to do, the leader move into it, or the feeder move into it absolutely perfectly with your elbows in the right position. And if you don't, you get hit with a stick on your legs, like you're saying. But you do that because you have to do it perfectly, because kids are too weak often to muscle through a handstand or a press up or something. And yeah, I just always think about this with climbing, where sometimes you'll take a big, strong guy who can do 20 pull-ups, and then they're just clawing their way up the wall. And sometimes it's hard to take them and say, no, like, we have to, I know you got to the top, but let's pull you back a few notches and teach you how to step on a foothold, like you're saying.
Yeah, I think you've spoken about this before, of both of us probably accelerated faster than the average person to the moderate grades, intermediate grades. Then we were like, oh God, there's footholds. We should use them as well. And then you suddenly, like, you slow down to a snail's pace, and I got frustrated as soon as I went on to trad, because I was like, God, the moves are supposed to be, everyone's telling me the moves are really easy on this. And yet I can see the veins in my arms, and they're getting bigger and bigger, because I was supposed to relax. Whilst my wife, who came from dancing, and I've worked with a lot of dancers in the past who focused on movement, and they focused on execution of movement, but they didn't have this upper body prerequisite strength. They were like, okay, how do I make this more efficient? Okay, I'm supposed to be feeling okay here, so I should relax, whilst I've got every single muscle in my upper body contracted. So yeah, you see it all the time. And I think quick acceleration at the start often means drop off. We actually see this quite a bit in bouldering at the moment, because so many people getting into bouldering as a fun activity, like something going to the gym. There's a good article on this about, there's a little commitment, there's little barriers in terms of when you go lead climb, you have to learn to belay, you have to commit yourself to it. But bouldering, you sign up, quick induction, off you go. Loads of people that have already got prerequisite strength go and climb really hard. They feel good. All of a sudden they hit this color or this grade. They can't get past it. Their fingers start hurting. They might get an injury, and they quit. And that's because they've had this quick acceleration and plateaued faster by having strength. Also, I think if it's a slower up, it's a more constant up.
Dancers are incredible movers. The other thing my daughter is in, instead of gymnastics, is ballet, and someday maybe a little more general dance. And something, this is just totally off topic, something I really appreciate about especially ballet is that a lot of sports teach you how to jump, but I feel like only dance teaches you to land. Like, they want you to land smoothly. And Well, I'm curious to hear how you solved your issue of being just too strong. Ollie, you could campus your way up anything and you realized you had to use your feet. And then just, yeah, some of these examples of the different sports that people did before, kind of what pros and cons it gives them, and then, how you help them, fill those holes.
Yeah, I think I definitely struggled with it, I must say. And because I just love the sport so much, I was lucky and stayed in it. But if I could go back to my younger self, and I don't usually have regrets, but it's really just take the ego out and just, give myself a slap in the face and say, because people would be like, oh, you've only been climbing this long, you've already climbed this grade. And, it really bolsters your ego. And then you just get slapped in the face by something way easier or technically easier. So I think for me, it was just really leaning back into doing more mileage, paying my dues, going back and almost reacquainting myself with an apprenticeship. And I think the way I did that was I'd climbed up to a certain grade and I picked a couple of grades under that. And I tried to do everyone in the area, every style. I had to do every one of that grade. And it kind of brought me all around. And then it's taken me 10 years really, or, well, no, it's been much longer than that, but it's taken me a long time to kind of stop the narrative as well, because you build this narrative of strong, not technical. And that doesn't actually help, because you end up leaning into, oh, but I can't do this. I'm the strong one. I'm going to try and power up this. And that's really good. And it's good to enjoy those things. And you should enjoy those, but don't pigeonhole yourself into a narrative of movement style. It's exactly the same the other way around. So with dancers that I've worked with, extremely flexible, great on the feet, do struggle a bit more with upper body, stereotypically, that I've seen. And they build a narrative of not having power, not having finger strength. And again, they start looking for really weird bits of beta and trying to get around it. And you're like, hang on a minute, you can do this. You can pull that. Just trust yourself. And you have to force that narrative to change. And that makes a huge difference. I think another sport is a really good example of, again, it's about working your weaknesses in the narrative, is swimmers. I work with professional swimmers, lots of muscle mass, quite big. Oh, small holds are not for me. Massive work capacity. Yes, great. Go to the 2 for sport climbs. You're going to be amazing. You should go to Flatanger. That's your place if you want to climb hard. Definitely enjoy it. Lean into it. I'm not saying not to do that, but don't create a narrative of I can't. If you really want to do it, you can do it. It just takes a little bit longer, and it takes a mind shift, and you have to pay your dues like every other climber would. So I think I always look at what they're good at, enjoy it, lean into it. If you want to work on the other area, treat yourself as a beginner mindset, really take yourself back and allow time to build up, and keep dipping into the thing you're good at to keep your psych. But I think if we think we're good at one thing, we should be good at everything.
It's interesting when you recognize these big weaknesses, because I don't know, you said something about take the ego out, take a few steps down in grades, try to do everything. I just love that idea of exposing yourself to, well, it could even just be a different discipline. Like you said, trad climbing or sport climbing, wherever the case may be, or bouldering. And something that I kind of want to pick on a little bit is, so let's say you are a strong one. Let's say you're Ollie, and you look at a problem and you just think, well, I can force my way up this climb, because it's 2 grades below, and I'm going to skip the hard foot rock over. I'm just going to dyno to that next hold. And, this is something that is a weird dichotomy where you want to both try something easier, and, be humbled by it, but then try to do it a certain way. But then I also find that when I push myself in a style to an absolute limit, I'm forced to learn the right technique, because I don't want to say cheat it, but I can't overpower it. We'll just say, because I'm more of a power, not technique guy. Although I want to watch my mindset, because you just, told me how important that is. And just like, is that like a reasonable thing to also think, where you kind of, sometimes it's good to absolutely push your limit in a style too, because you're forced into, well, just like in gymnastics, for instance, you're too weak to do it. The overpowering way. You have to do it the technical way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, you'll always have, well, for most of us anyway, you'll always have a limit. If Will goes on something that's super fingery, Burden of Dreams or whatever, he still has to execute. He's got the strongest fingers in the world, still has to execute, still has to do the movements correctly. So you are definitely right. Even if it's your style, it'll still work the other elements. And I guess it's just making sure that if you do go down that route, if you do actually want to become all round, or you do want to plug these holes, you don't constrain the environment too much. By that I mean, and again, this is totally up to you, and this is like depending on how broad you want to be. But as a powerful climber, someone who's good on steep stuff, you could say, I'm really good at roof climbing. Therefore, you always go on to roof climbs, and there is going to be a technical element to that. There's going to be a certain foot style, foothold style, handhold style, movement style. But if you stay in the constraint of the environment, you're still limiting the technical skill set that you're building up. So you might end up with a roof where you have to come around the roof, top out a slab, and all of a sudden you fall off. And we have seen that quite a lot. Like Daniel Woods is probably a really good example of this. I think there's great footage of him in Bishop jumping off the slab because he's one of the best climbers in the world, steep and roofs, but can't climb a slab. So it depends what you want to do. And I think you can always learn more on your limit, but if you're pushed out the constraint of the environment, you're going to get a slap in the face still.
Just to be nice to Daniel, I think I know which video you're talking about. And I think one thing that Daniel doesn't like is getting too high off the deck. I think he's, and I'll tell you, I know what you're talking about. I know where it is, and it's up there. And maybe slab climbing isn't his forte. That's still hard slab. I think he didn't want to fall off there because it's but yeah, I mean, I think also it's so interesting how people will pigeonhole themselves mentally, like you're saying. That's like really the first step. And you said it took you 10 plus years to unwind that mentality. And it's something that I still work on, where I tell myself I'm bad at slightly overhanging crimp lines, but then you do get extreme joy out of succeeding in any style. And then I also just notice a lot of crossover where you would think that, so I am that roof climber. I am that guy for whatever reason. But I find that when I don't do it and I lean into styles that I'm not as good at, and I go back to roof climbing, I'm even better at roof climbing. And there is more crossover than people think. Maybe if I was, Will Bosi and I was on Burden of Dreams, there'd be less crossover and the specializations happen. But let's face it, most of us are not Will.
Yeah. And to back up what you said, yeah, Daniel, I was picking on him there. I don't actually know his climbing style that well. So, I think you are right. I mean, I think because I always think about climbing as like a lifer, and I always think about most elite climbers will be lifers as well, and they will want to try and do different things to maintain motivation as well. So I think variety provides that a little bit. So even if you have someone who's very, very specialized and they're only known or they're only performing in one style, being able to go off season and do different things is good for their body. It's good for their mind. And like you say, if you can lean into the joy of learning in different styles, it does really work. And the crossover is great. For instance, really big learning thing for me was crack climbing, learning to foot jam, hand jam. You go somewhere where there's two footers and all of a sudden you're like, oh, sick, there's a rest here. And it's just between two completely flared two footers. Now I've just seen someone go up there and just try and pinch the hell out of them. And I've just put a foot lock in and a hand lock, and I'm like, oh my God, this actually works. This feels like a cheat code. So yeah, I think you can always learn, but there's also the practice of the joy of doing something different just for your mind and body.
On that note of doing something different, we're talking about coaching youth athletes, and I'm just curious about when climbers should specialize. You deal with Olympians, with pro climbers, and boy, the Olympians are young. They're young. I mean, gymnastics has the same thing where, they look at you at 13, they say, okay, you're going to the Olympics in 7 years or you're out of the game entirely. And it just, in today's sport, when should climbers start specializing? Just this all comes to mind because we're talking about the different disciplines. I mean, climbing as a whole, if you look at board climbing versus a slabby competition style, very different. But yeah, how do you guide people on when to go all in on climbing instead of, say, gymnastics plus swimming plus climbing?
I think climbing's interesting because it's so varied in movement style. And like you said, there's so many options to do. You can be outside, you can be inside. And so I think we're quite lucky in having so much movement patterns, which is really good. But I mean, I can give you my theory, which is what I've told other parents. And actually, so I'm expecting my first child next year.
Oh, you are? Congratulations, dude. Sorry, I interrupt you. I'm just too excited. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm really psyched, and I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and stick by this rule. Is I think you're doing a fixed terrain sport, which by that I mean gymnastics, climbing, anything where you're moving your body in space, but the environment isn't moving very much. So you learn body awareness. Climbers are really good for this. The wall doesn't move, but you're moving in space. You land. Same with gymnastics is probably the best version of this. But then you take someone who only does that, a gymnast, and specialize from a really young age. You put them on the skateboard where the object is moving, and they're like can't control it. There's too much tension, and they can't go with the flow, and they can't move with the object. So surfing, skateboarding, biking, those things, there's a moving object component. So if you do both of those, that's a great start. Add in a ball sport, foot, hand, eye coordination. Again, you're perceiving something that's coming and going out of your field of control. And again, I think that builds another skill component. This is like the most geeky version of parenting, isn't it? But
no, I love it. This is me.
Well, I'll say a good friend of mine, Sam Whitaker, who owns the Climbing Works, and his son Arnie, who I do a little bit of training with and like chat to quite a lot. This is something I've sort of spoke to them about quite a bit, and it's something I really benefited from as a child. My parents exposed me to different things, and I just noticed when you took a ball sport athlete and got them to do body awareness, they would potentially struggle. You get a gymnast onto skateboards, there's too much control. You get a skateboarder, they're pretty good on body awareness, but then trying to catch a ball or something, there's crossovers. If you hit all three of those, even if it's very, very amateur, I think you're developing a really good athlete, and you develop someone who can translate all that across. And it doesn't have to be a high level. So you can specialize, but just do something else as a hobby. And that's kind of my ethos and plan anyway.
First of all, congratulations again. Very happy to hear that you're joining the Trad Dad crew, probably. I think it's interesting that you are segregating these sports into person on fixed terrain, person on moving or with maybe a moving terrain like a skateboard, and then a ball sport. It's funny because I would have thought you might have said, I don't know, upper body dominant, lower body dominant. I never thought about it this way, but I have 2 young children. And I also think that even though it's really important what you help your kids get set up for, like the lesson maybe applies lesser as you get older, but to think that it's completely irrelevant that a climber maybe spends some time doing some other things that aren't just climbing seems relevant, especially if you're just kind of want to have a healthy body and potentially that's important for climbing as well somehow, that you have other proprioception abilities. But I often quote this study that I can't find, so maybe I'm making it up, but I'm just going to put it out there. The internet can get angry at me. I thought I read something along the lines of a runner's stride frequency cannot increase past the age of 12. So doesn't mean they can't run faster than the age of 12, because the distance between your strides can increase due to strength gains, but the frequency, the turnover, how many steps they're taking per period of time does not increase. And what that said to me is that there's some movement patterns that may get ingrained in us at 12 and younger that maybe are potentially impossible to change as we get older. And so the idea that you get exposed to as many different kind of movement patterns when you're young seems important. So, we're all screwed. If you're listening to this podcast, you're older than 12. I know because I see my demographics, but your kids, you can live out your dreams through your kids. There you go. Force them to do it.
Yeah. Perfect. I'll take that one on board. Well, there is the theory of when you learn a new movement pattern, everyone talks about new neural networks being created, muscle to brain with inside your brain. But one of the things early on, before 12 and up to 12, is the insulation of those neural networks, the myelin sheath, gets thicker and thicker, which means your signal's getting faster. So instead of having some kind of dial up, you've got fiber optic of, you're laying down fiber optic. So the more movements you can do, the greater. It's the same with sort of language. The greater you can exploit those later on. I'm gonna have to refute the study, just because I've done studies on barefoot running.
Please.
And taking away cushioning immediately increases stride frequency, just because it reduces the size because of impact. So I'm not sure. I would love to see that study, but
I'll have to look on ChatGPT. But there is something interesting about it. Does seem like it's a good argument for exposing your kids to a bunch of different movement patterns. But I will say that climbing sure seems to, comp climbing, all this stuff really, I don't know. They're amazing athletes. These kids are coming out really amazing. I think climbing, maybe when I first started, I thought of it as all being, this just shows the era I grew up in, but very technical sport climbing of 3 points on and very flat and very crimpy. And I'm not saying those weren't amazing athletes, but the kids now with their run and jump and coordination, it's incredible what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was trying to think about how I perceive athletes have changed since starting Lattice and since before that. And I might be controversial here. Physically, I don't hold anyone in higher regard than the past. When you look at the feats of the past, physically, I don't think there's much difference there. And like, I've had people like Keith Sharples, so shout out to Keith, who is in his mid-60s now. He came round to my house quite a few years ago now, and he was sort of talking about, I think he was about 62 at the time, 61 maybe, and saying, look, Ollie, I think in 5 years' time, I'm going to be starting to decline. And he was like, he brought me 30 years worth of training diaries. And this is the guy who did 10 pull-ups on the minute for an hour, multiple times a week back in the day. And this is like Ben Moon era, Malcolm Smith era, that sort of, well, actually before those guys, but he was the person before them. And I think in terms of with what they did with the knowledge they had, they were physical beasts, but the technical side, I think, is what's improved. And then the style and tactics of how we do things is massively improved. And I think that seems to be the big difference for me between the sort of the past and where we're going now, is using that physical side in a whole new way, in a whole new world, in more variety. But actually the work ethic and what they put down, I don't think has improved. Even though the grades have gone up, I don't think that's down to physical ability personally. Interesting.
I don't know if that is controversial or not, but it's a topic that comes up surprisingly often in my group of old guys. Is the new generation physically stronger than the old ones? And then, we talk about Fred Nicole locking off Shosha Loza. We talk about Chris Sharma seeming like with poor technique, like campusing the hardest things in that era. And I push back because I've heard of some metrics. You just said something about Will Bosi having the strongest fingers in the world. And I just think that the net that was cast is much wider than it was 10 years ago. And so I just feel like there must be this genetic component, but perhaps not. I mean, honestly, Ollie, no one would know better than you in some ways. Your data set is the one.
Yeah. I mean, I would say on the whole, because education's got better and there's much wider net, the general standard has increased for sure. And probably maybe what I was saying was too simplistic before. In terms of what was available and who was available, you can imagine sort of the error markers was a lot smaller than what we have now. And like now we have so many sport climbs over 9A in Spain in different styles. So you can fit into these different levels of elite performance way easier. Back in the day, it was, could you just hold the smallest edge for 4 bolts and just rat down? And that was V14. I do think that the general level's improved. I think there is stronger people now because they've trained from a much younger age, but I don't think the actual level is as different as we think. What is different is the fact that people get access to better training tactics, more exposure to different styles and more options now. And that's not to take it away from anyone who's working really hard now, but I think just to give the credit back in the day, like, I mean, say in the UK, for example, in the 80s, we probably had more full-time climbers in the UK than we do now because everyone was on the dole. So everyone was on benefits. So we had a huge influx of full-time climbers. Now you have students, and then you have probably a very underfunded group of climbers. At least in the UK, the sponsorship levels are pretty pitiful compared to what they deserve. So you're kind of like, well, no wonder they were so good back in the day. If you had that influx of full-time climbers now, imagine what they could do.
Oh, so good. I can't help but be interested in that stuff. And I think what really also comes down to is that whenever you want to compare greats from whatever era, I think the point is that with whatever they have available to them, whether it's training, whether it's gear, knee pads or crash pads, the best of the best were always pushing whatever limit was available to them. And that's really what makes someone special, is that I think it's always easiest to see it in gear, where in America, it was a really big deal when this guy, Jason Kale, did Evolution, just a tall, on that same boulder that I believe is the one Daniel backed off of, because it's tall, man. It's tall. And, you look at the ground, he has a few ratty soft pads and he's up there. And, that is less cutting edge now. But for the time it was wild. And now you see people with 40 pads going, around the corner to a taller line called Ambrosia. And I would argue that they're actually the same thing. They may look different, but the achievement was similarly great for whichever athlete did it at the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's been interesting, actually. I was thinking then about the data side, and so I've been lucky enough to test sort of all the greats in terms of back in the day. And obviously this is when they're older. And I would genuinely say they made a lot of what they had. And actually, this probably again is a bit controversial. I'd say their power to strength ratio, when I say power to strength, I mean contact strength and speed compared to their strength, was actually really high compared to just their static strength for a lot of the athletes I've seen. And I don't know whether that's because they were forced into a certain style of training as well. But you are right in terms of the difference now in terms of metrics. Like a competition athlete on a lead road today, yes, they are on harder climbs. And particularly, I think female athletes is definitely where we've seen a much bigger push. I think fair play in terms of that side of the sport. But again, that's a wider net. But in terms of the crimpy head walls, you still see a lot of athletes falling off crimpy head walls. And then you look at the climbs in the 90s where it was 30 meters of 15 to 5 mil edges. And you're like, that is disgusting. No wonder it wasn't a spectator sport. It was just whose elbows could get highest before they fell off. So yeah, it'll be interesting actually to see if in LA, if we see more specialization, we see the fight coming back in lead climbing, which has been apparent in the last year of comps. The spectator sport of getting to a head wall and just seeing if you can fight your way up does seem to be back. I'd be interested to see what some of the old setters and athletes, Ramon de Grange and stuff, what they think of the level of the routes. That really fascinates me because it'll move back more towards a similar style than it has been.
Quick break while I tell you about today's sponsor. Thank you to all the patrons who help make this show possible. Join them so you can get episodes early before anyone else, and those episodes are ad-free. As a patron, you also get to submit questions for upcoming guests. The answers to those questions are only available to patrons. Follow the link in the show notes to join now. You also get access to a private Discord where you'll find me and other people who want to go from good to great. Okay, back to the pod. Yeah, it seems like the pendulum always does swing a bit, and this always gets into the discussion around grading, where we've seen new grades show up, but then it's kind of in a style that wasn't trained for before. Like for my era, the example I always use is that in Waco, we had a bunch of roofs that had really hard grades, but then I was one of the first kind of gym rats, and I climbed on steep stuff all the time, big juggy steep stuff. And I go Waco and I think, well, this is easy. I'm used to this. Why does it get this high grade? And so, I think in competition, they do a good job of pulling out different things from each era to try to kind of surprise climbers, with a hand jam. Oh, it's a boulder. I'm a boulder. I'm a modern comp climber. Why would I know how to hand jam? So that's kind of one of the cool things about competition, and why it's good to have that ever evolves. New stuff comes up, old stuff, make sure it's not forgotten, and forces climbers to have quite a skill set.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going through this in the moment with a couple of athletes that went to the Olympics in Paris, and we're about to go into base training season again, and we're going, right, what came up this year that totally threw us? And there's still movement patterns which you go, they don't actually look too dissimilar, but I had athletes say, I don't think I've ever done that before. And I think one thing that I really like, a saying that I heard, I can't remember who to quote here, but we shouldn't use 10,000 hours, even though I said that earlier. We should use 10,000 iterations, because that is where the learning is, and it's purposeful learning. So what our goal is with the movement styles is give them the opportunity to try so many different movements and try over and over and over again, and just get them exposed to that many things. And that means that the training is so reliant on setters and that side of things. And then they do have exposure to this huge movement patterns. And I think that's where the secret sauce is for these athletes moving forward, is just don't get caught out.
So you said that you're starting to set up some base training for pros, Olympians. I guess that's because the World Cup season is kind of coming to a close. You just gave a little behind the scenes on that, but just tell me more about what it's like to set up a training plan for the best of the best of our sport.
Yeah, no worries. So yeah, you get to the end of the season, you desperately try to force them to rest. At least the athletes I have. And I actually, Erin McNeese, I think she's going to put this on YouTube. She told me she was in a rest week, and she came in and she went to all of the climbing depots. So that's like, I think it's about 6 or 7 different gyms around the country. This isn't local. And tried to do all the hardest circuits in all of them in a day. And she went from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. and fell off the last one, I think, or she might have done the last one. So you'll have to watch it. But I was like, Erin, you're supposed to be resting. This is the goal. So we do a rest period, and then we go, cool. How did we do? And I'm lucky to work with a couple of great coaches, working with Erin, for example, but other athletes. It might just be myself going through this process. We review the season, what went well, what didn't go well, what can we improve on, what came up, what do we think is going to happen next year? Then for me, I look at all the data and see, okay, what did I do in the previous base phases? Because I usually have from November to this year, it's till the end of April before comps start. And I'll do this with outdoor athletes as well, at the elite level. And I'll go, okay, what are we trying to achieve this year? What is the main thing? And that could be a normal periodization, which is work on the fitness first, then build into the more specifics, building into strength, building into power. And you're doing a mix throughout. And I actually use a lot of power endurance type work throughout the entire season, so they're mentally and physically able to climb like that. And it builds quite a lot of endurance as well. There's a lot more research coming out about that. This year for Erin, for example, I'm actually going to flip the periodization completely on its head to build her maximum strength and power up. So you are really playing a cat and mouse game with the setters, with where the athlete's at that point in their career, and trying to work on using that data that you know of them in the past and had their previous performances to indicate where to take them. For Erin, I've gone up by around 10% volume every year. And I would say that's pretty much pushed her to break. Like, we've been really close to breaking point in the seasons. and I can see where I've pushed her, and, she goes really into a training hole in the season, to the point of she's really mentally in like quite a specific place, which like you have to pull them out. You have to give them confidence again. But the interesting thing is, if you told someone 10% over 12 months, it doesn't really spark too much, but 10% is a hell of a lot. So yeah, that's kind of the goal in this period of time, is just reviewing the past and looking forward.
I'm on the other end where I thought 10% actually sounded like quite a bit. I think that one of the things people don't appreciate about elite athletes is the sheer volume that they're able to handle, that built up through their whole life. But more volume, it's not just that more volume is better, but like you're saying, iterations are good. And if someone can go through more iterations because they can handle more workload, it's a good thing. And so consistently pushing up your ability to handle more volume is great. To be honest, just because we called him out before, I think that's one of the things that Daniel Woods is incredible at, is that guy can handle a lot of climbing.
Yeah. I mean, like I've worked with so many like athletes where you just build and build and build. And I would say, like, I've made mistakes in the past with these elite athletes, is being too kind. I don't think I've ever gone too hard with an elite athlete, because you usually get the warning signs quite early and you're able to adjust. But again, picking on Erin here as an example, say 2022, I think it was. I think I was too soft on her throughout the season, so her performance dropped off. It's a really long season now for comp athletes. And then in the winter, we kind of pushed quite hard, but I was constantly like aware of how much I was pushing. The year going into the Olympics, it was like, cool, are we going for this? Like, are we going to put all our eggs in this basket? And she didn't even know she was going to be able to qualify. And like, I've just absolutely hammered her. And like I said, we went to the tipping point. I know the signs to look out for. I know the limits to go to. But she got through that and she just leveled up completely. We did the same again this year. And I think if you look at the lead results, World Cup lead results, you can say that it worked. And now I'm like, cool. So can I go again with volume? Probably not, because there's a limit to that. Can you go the same in intensity? And the point is, like you said, is the intensity changes as well. So the base season 23, 24, she was doing a high volume on all the local climbs, and the local climbs were max effort. Last winter, 24, 25, I think I've got my years right. She kept saying to me, I'm not doing enough volume. I'm doing everything. And I was like, Erin, you're just finding all of the boulders easy. And she didn't have hard enough setting locally for her. So this year we're having to organize loads of settings so that she can do the same volume, but on even harder climbs. So it's not one or the other, volume and intensity. It's both just building and building and building. But that takes years of work to get there. Or you take a risk, and you've got to be able to be okay with paying the consequences if you get it wrong.
Let's keep picking on Erin, because she is climbing extremely well. Just amazing last couple of years. This last season, really, 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 really impressive. Good job, Erin. So you guys have been working together for, you said, around 4+ years. Has anything changed in that time? Because you really did have a big breakout season. I know you said you've been pushing volume, but was it just this steady march from being, I'm sure she was a fantastic climber when you started working with her, but now she's one of the best in the world.
Yeah. I think it might even be around 7 years or something now. It's been ages. I would say it was probably just the commitment of, I think she's always been committed, but I think the trust in her team around her, including myself, to push her to the limit. And I don't think we gave her the opportunity to go that deep before, if I'm honest. Like a lot of people probably know, I worked with Toby Roberts for sort of 7 years, 8 years, and I built that up with him over time and time and time. But I could see that with Erin, we had this transition phase of, okay, let's go all in. And her parents have been amazing, supporting her, being able to like actually go for this. She finished school. School's a big thing. Just to clarify, every kid, I don't agree with anyone quitting school, but it does take time. It takes energy. You finish school, that helps. Yeah, and I guess she just really went for it and committed, and that's like one of the big things is she was willing to obsess and to take the risk of going that deep.
When you can track someone's metrics over this long period of time, can you predict a season based on how the training goes beforehand? Do you ever say like, oh, this is going to be a good one, or wow, we're struggling this year and I'm unsure if this is going to return the result you're looking for?
I would say if I was purely looking at metrics, say if I looked at another coach's work and the metrics without talking to them or knowing the athlete, I'd say I'm pretty good at predicting these days. And I think the system that we've built is really good for that. I would say the real key thing is if I'm working with an athlete and I can see their metrics and then I know I've taught to them, I know where their mindset's at, which is so important. I think then I know, because I can tell when you have someone who's just completely on point and completely like physically in the best place ever. And you can see the warning signs of them. The pressure's too much in the head already. And that's the art of getting the two things perfect. Like a good example again is I've got athletes that need to arrive more fatigued than fresh so they feel confident enough to execute. Because if they arrive totally fresh, they don't believe in themselves, they don't feel sharp, they don't feel ready to go. And dropping off that physical ability just a tiny bit is better than arriving completely fresh and completely frantic. And I think knowing athletes like that and understanding the combination is what's important.
You said that when you push people, sometimes you see some warning signs during their training. I'd like to know what those warning signs are, as well as do you find that the average climber typically does too much or too little?
The warning signs is generally to do with energy levels. It can be to do with feelings in the morning. It can be motivation for the week ahead. And it's all the kind of nuance around just generally how they're feeling motivation wise around their training. And then you start to notice it in the execution of the sessions as well. So you might start to see like really quick peaks in a session. So they feel pretty good and then they drop off, or they take a longer time to warm up in the first place. So I'm looking for all these kind of signals. So at the start of the week, it might be asking the questions of how they're feeling about the week ahead, how they found the week behind. And then are they taking longer to warm up? And then during the actual training part, do they drop off quicker than before? And I think they're kind of like, when we've looked at the data year on, year out, they're the main things we start to see. Obviously, if you're having conversations with the athletes, you can really start telling the language. And most really good athletes will deny as much as possible. And they'll say, no, I'm good. I'm fine. I'm really psyched. I'm ready to go. And you start questioning them about where they're doing stuff and are they prepping food and all that sort of stuff. And all the little things around climbing start to drop off. And that's the key bits. And that's the things you need to target when those things happen, is like really drill down on those. In terms of the average climber, training too much, too little, I would genuinely say everyone trains too much quickly and too little chronically. So it's that old adage of you think you can do more in a week but less in a year, I think is the way of saying it. I can't remember the actual words. People always they really ramp up the training. And this is where that thing I said about the 10% is. Most climbers will go from 0 to 100% more, or like, rather than think, okay, this year I'm just going to add 10% really systemically, really slowly. So it's all about building up over time. So I actually think a lot of climbers can train way more throughout the year, have much deeper base seasons if they're going on a trip or got something coming up, but they need to take the time to get there, and they need to not rush into it or try and do too much in month one. And that's the secret, I think.
That is really, really good advice. You overestimate what you can accomplish. I don't remember the thing. Something like overestimate a week, underestimate in a year. I did a podcast recently with Sierra Blair, and she's a World Cup athlete from, more in the teens. But she said, do 97%, 100% of the time. And I don't know why, but I thought that was like really pithy and just kind of stuck with me, because I think I'm similar to most, where you get psyched, you get inspired. You listen to a podcast with Ollie Torr and you think, I'm going in today or this week and I'm going to crush it. And it takes 10,000 hours or 10,000 iterations, not just 10,000% try hard for one day. And so, yeah, I'm totally guilty of that, man. I am totally guilty of that time and time again. So, I mean, this is why it's good to have a coach. And I think that something that I've learned about myself over time is that I think I get a little bit better as an athlete, having more intuition about when to push it and when to pull back. But then I guess I'm starting to question that when I hear what you're saying about the best athletes always want to push it. That's just kind of, I found that really interesting to hear that the best athletes maybe never want to pull back, and it just makes me question my mentality.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I work with a lot of coaches in football and cycling and stuff. We try and do a lot of cross-pollination of knowledge. And one of the football coaches I know works with in sort of the Premier League in the UK said he's constantly having to push the footballers to do more, and like always wants them to be trying to do a bit more. And I said, God, I'm always having to pull the climbers back, like the elite climbers. And actually, maybe it's the ones that I've worked with for a long time, and it's been built into the ethos and the way that I work. I think there's other coaches in the UK, for example, that when I look at some of the training they're doing, I'm like, you're doing a disservice by not pushing them hard enough. But again, taking on those athletes myself, I can't just ram it down the throat and say my way or the highway. That takes time and takes time to build up. And again, it's great to lean into that motivation. And I do believe in when you're feeling the psych, lean in. You're most efficient when you're inspired in terms of the way we work. But maybe to Sierra's point is I would always give someone something where they can tick 100% off. And they're telling me they did all these extra little things like mobility, or, they prepped food, they did all this. Give me more, Ollie. Come on, I want to do more. Than be like, oh, I couldn't get 10% done, or I couldn't get 20% done. And I'm like, oh, don't worry about it. Because then they have to make the decision of what they drop. They feel like they're not failing. And I think long-term momentum's built by success.
Yeah, I have this thing around, I have to earn my training, in the sense that if I'm climbing 3 days a week with my buddies, having great sessions, and then I get done and I think, gosh, I want to do more. Like, I want to go do some pull-ups or whatever the case may be. There's something about that, like listening to myself and be excited for more after I've already climbed, because training is great, but don't forget to just get out there and climb. And then if you're still psyched, maybe then you can do more. I think it's amazing that you're cross-pollinating with other sports and you're at the cutting edge of climbing. And it makes me wonder, like, when you compare our state-of-the-art training and where we are and our understanding of our physiology and the methods that we need to get stronger, how are we doing in comparison to these sports that are, I don't know if they're necessarily more well established compared to us, but they often have more funding, and perhaps there's a lot of Ollies or of your level and caliber in something like football?
Generally speaking, I would say we sit something like triathlon did 10 years ago, where we are far more willing to experiment and be innovative and take the latest research, rather than having big systems that is much harder to have systemic changes in. Football is actually, generally speaking, it's been so far behind in using research because they've had tradition. It's been so long and they've got certain ways of working. So to change, it's really hard. Same with running and cycling. That used to be quite a hard thing to change until sort of the mid 20 teens. But triathletes, because it was such a new sport, they were just trying new stuff all the time. And they were trying new techniques, new swimming outfits. Everything was constantly changing and they were iterating. And that's when cross-pollination happened there. Now, cycling is, you look at the Tour de France, if anyone watches the Tour de France Unchained, you have the old teams which don't have the funding technically, but they've got this like history, they've got this passion, which is amazing. But they're missing out on some of the most cutting edge research stuff going in there because they have a certain way of working. And then you have the people that are at the cutting edge, and the smaller teams that are now producing really good athletes. I think they don't have as much tradition, and they're newer teams, and they're starting to produce better athletes because they're bringing in sports science. So for me in climbing, at least in my exposure, which is very lucky in my team, like everyone's constantly innovating, everyone's trying to do better, everyone's questioning, looking around. And I think if we can start building in some technology into what we do, I think we are going to accelerate and catch up very quickly with some of these other sports. But it's harder because we're such a skill-based sport.
All right. That's a great segue into talking more about big data sets and what you can do with it. But before we go there, I got to ask you if there's any sacred cows or traditions that you think either we're going to have to slaughter or that you've seen kind of in the past 10 years that used to be just dogma, like, I don't know, you have to hang on this edge or wherever the case may be. Like, is there anything you think that is going to go by the wayside or already has?
That's a very good question. Actually.
Spandex? Is it spandex?
I think that's been overlooked. We should bring that back. I think one thing that we've got a load of really good specialists with flexibility on the team. And I think we really believe in building mobility. But for me, it's understanding where mobility is needed and who's it for, why are you doing it? So if you've got a massive strength and range in your upper body, that's the ideal scenario. But if you're a really steep climber, you don't need a huge amount of range, and actually residual tension is really good. So if you're like us, they've come from gymnastics, I've never suffered from shoulder problems. I always feel really good in extended positions, and I generally have a relatively good shoulder range. But for a lot of people that haven't built that up over time, I know so many really good climbers that are quite stiff in the upper body, and they use that tension to great effect, both on endurance routes and on powerful routes and problems. So to build range willy-nilly without thought can result in like a change in movement style. So that's probably one thing. And then I guess the other side is the fact that endurance isn't needed for boulders. I mean, I think this has been talked about loads, but I still have to battle that with a lot of boulderers. Is like, if you want to be able to try harder in a session and have more attempts, build endurance, because your sessions you'll recover faster between attempts. You'll be able to climb more in the week. It's about, even if you're not bothered about performing, you just want to enjoy climbing more endurance does help you would do that. And I think that can be overlooked still by a lot of people.
Yeah, Maya used to be the other way, where there was definitely a phase in the 90s where everyone had endurance and they had no power, and bouldering sure helped that out too, just getting that absolute power and bringing that to the longer pitches. So you said that you have a big data set, really interesting, and you got it from being at the cutting edge of climbing. And Ollie, something that I remember about Lattice that was really interesting is that my buddy took an assessment, like he was one of the first ones 10 years ago, but I'm over here. I was in California at the time. You were over in the UK, and yet we got to check our metrics against everyone else in the world. I just love that ability to understand where I'm at as part of a greater whole. And so now you guys have been doing that for 10 years. And I'm curious, what are you doing with all that data?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long road, and like I pretty much have had this idea for such a long time of creating a bit more of a system. And I tried to do this, I think 9 years ago, of developing an app. So we've got an app where all of our athletes deliver our training plans on. And pretty much I wanted to create a system that was quicker to respond than I was, because with the best will in the world, I put in a lot of hours with my athletes. I try my very best, but as with all sports, all athletes, it's so hard to get reactive data and reactive information to them. And it's really hard for them to log a lot of the time. You go to any coach in any sport, and like I said, the cross-pollination with other sports, all the other coaches I speak to, football coaches trying to get information out of their athletes is nigh on impossible. It's really hard to do. And then for them to respond quickly enough to change the program up without seeing them in person is really hard as well. So all this data has been building up to creating this system where I can give immediate feedback to my athletes. And the reason for doing that is they can go into a session and know exactly what to do, avoid getting injured by overload in the best case scenario, make constant progression, and then I can spend more time working on the soft skills. So we've kind of called it this intelligent climbing system. It's this little engine that we built behind the scenes, and we tried using AI. We admit to trying to use AI to help with this. And I think it will get there, but with the amount of data we have, the amount of input we've got in, I'd rather have more control over the system. And I really want to check exactly what's happening. So we've got our app already. We've built this system out so that we can help our clients. And then we're actually going to release a form of that to the general public, which doesn't involve coaching. But it means that people have access to the same principles, which tells them what to do, how to do it, and it's completely custom to them. Again, just going from that ethos of starting the company of, we want to put the best training information out there. And I want to make sure that that's accessible and it's not limited by a really high price tag, which is unfortunately what needs to be when I'm paying a coach to work with people.
Well, there can only be so many people at once. And the ability to scale is just important, because even if you end up needing to work with you or one of your coaches, you maybe can't start out there, or wherever the case may be, and just having some access to all the knowledge that you've built up over 10 years is really cool. And I like the idea that you guys were already doing this behind the scenes as coaches in all of your in-person interactions, and taking that learning and then packaging it in a way that is allowing everyone else to just try it on their own and get part of that collective knowledge base into their day-to-day activity. Is, I mean, I'm sure you were working on it for a long time. Is that what was keeping you busy, Ollie? Is that what it was?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously we're trying to build something that I'm really proud of and really cool. But one of the big motivators for me is we're always being asked, are you available to do a plan? Which is maybe obviously I've got a limited time. It's going to become more limited as a dad. And then also, I can't afford your prices. Are you able to do something for me? Which is used to be fine back in the day when it was me, my time, my effort. But then when I'm trying to provide good careers for the coaches that work for us and provide a good lifestyle, provide good pay, you can only discount so much. So trying to create something which is more scalable, like you say, first of all, it just excites me. I think it's awesome trying to create a system that works really well and uses 10 years worth of brain power and data collection and a coaching team, everyone just putting into this one thing. But then it also means that those people that always have contacted me over the years have something more accessible. And I don't think everyone needs a coach. Everyone deserves to work with a coach if they want to and has time. But a lot of people just need nudging in the right direction. You need a little bit of direction. You don't need to train every climbing session, but you might want to add things on. So you might want to do 2 open climbing sessions in a week. You want to have one with a bit more structure. So what do I do on that day? And that's kind of what we've been trying to develop. And I think there's like over 1 billion iterations of plans because of all the questions that we ask people on the way. Wow. So the way that it works is you do a quiz, you answer all these questions about yourself, your goals, where you live, what you're trying to achieve. And we put that into our sort of database, our engine, and it produces a plan. But when you think about between us, our sex, height, weight, age, goal, what we're trying to do this season and when we want to peak, and you think about all the iterations there's so many. So we've gone through this over and over and over. And myself and Cam, one of the other coaches, have manually looked at hundreds of these plans now, trying to make sure that it's perfect for as many people as possible. So you fill that out, you receive a custom plan. And then the magic bit, which is what I'm really excited about, which I've been trying to work towards for years, is every week it asks you, how are you feeling? How was last week? How motivated are you for the coming up? All those things I said before about understanding the athlete. Then the engine looks at what you did last week, how you're feeling, and then it changes the plan individually, workout by workout, to make sure you're on the right track, and it builds you towards your chosen date. And this is the thing I'm really excited about is, I mean, it's just going to give people more access to the coaching mind that I would do without having to be on the phone to me.
Yeah, people often think, I say people, I mean myself, I often think that I'm a special snowflake. I think like, oh, I need something really unique. And I might, when all the other low hanging fruit has been done. But honestly, a lot of us need a nudge and need the basics and need something to kind of hold us accountable and look us back in the face and say, well, did you do the pull-ups? Did you actually do them? And I think it's really interesting that, that's a really big deal, that then you have the ongoing, hey, how did that last one go? And how are you feeling this morning? Oh, you didn't sleep because you have a newborn and you feel like crap? Well, okay, let's pull it back a notch. And that's often really missing in training plans. And it's just, you got to do 5 sets of 8. It's like, well, I'm really, the first set of 8 felt like I was going to die. Should I really do 5 more sets at that same intensity? And, that modulation, I mean, it's what a good coach does, is kind of works with you in lockstep. So be able to take all that experience of exactly how much to tone it down and put it into a more behind the scenes automated way is, that's a big step.
Yeah. And I'm being honest, like, I'm going to carry on coaching. I've got a coaching team that are going to carry on coaching. We believe in coaching. This is just another option that's available to make it just more convenient and more available. And let's be honest, I'm not 100% sure it's going to work. We're going to see how it works. So it's this December. I think it's coming out similar time. You said about this podcast might come out, and we're actually going to offer a founder's lifetime pricing structure for those people that have put the faith in us, they trust us to try to deliver. So we're not dead sure on what it's going to be yet, but anyone who kind of trusts us at the initial point, we're going to lock down the price for life, because we've just put so much work into this, and it is something new for the community. It is something that's different. It's not done in, I think, any other sport in the same way, and it's definitely not done in a skill-based sport, which requires so much movement patterns. So yeah, we're going to continue investing in this. In the future, like you said, I think the key bit for me is, you said, have people improved earlier? Have people actually become better? I want this to help the climbing community level up. I want to stop injuries happening as much. Some of the chronic stuff in football, there was years, decades of hamstring injuries from overly strong quads, weak hamstrings. Someone did some research. The Nord board came out. Hamstring injuries have dropped by 95% or 90%. Finger injuries in climbers, how prevalent is a finger injury? And I'm not going to say we're going to cure that, but if I can take 5-10% movement in that direction, that'd be amazing, because that's going to mean all those climbers are going to have more time enjoying the sport. If we can help those climbers that usually drop off because of lack of progression become lifers, awesome. I mean, it's only going to help the sport. It's going to help us who work in the industry, which is great, but I can only see this getting better and better with more investment in technology like this.
Well, you're going to get more data and more feedback. You just, I mean, that's what's great about this stuff, is it does just get better. And, I think the thing that I find interesting is, I can imagine the future. Well, I mean, it sounds like this is kind of the genesis of it is, you guys as coaches were using the data set. You're talking about, you have 7 years with Erin, so you can look at how she's progressed, and then layering on, well, we've had 100 people like Erin, and this is some of the things that we're looking at to then plan her next season. And my hunch is that, the best use of technology is in lockstep with both your intuition and a coach. I can imagine that your coach says, my back end, my app is saying, hey, she needs to be pushed. She says she doesn't want to, but I think we should push her, and just kind of using all of that data to make better decisions and not just even focus on human intuition. It should be done in lockstep is really what should happen.
Absolutely. And I think that's the key bit of how we've created this, is like, we could just take, like I said before, just take all this data from the past, chuck it in an AI model and say, make training plans. But like everything, every decision on every level has been looked at by me and my team, and we'll continue to do that, because there's people, and I do always hold the thing of like, people trust us with their time and their money, and I take that responsibility very heavily. I know in the past when I've done training or things haven't worked out how it's meant to me, and you lose a season, that's, it's a big deal for people. So I still want to have that control over the system. And then it's also bringing in the experts into the team. Like I worked heavily developing Crimped, the training app, and I've brought on Peter from over there onto the team, on the Lattice team, who's worked in the app space. He's seen loads of data in terms of Crimped, and we know what works, what doesn't work. And I want to keep bringing in all the best people in the industry and working collaboratively to make sure we can do everything in the right way with people in mind, not robotic, demanding apps or like Duolingo just nagging you to do your finger pull-ups. It's like a person saying, this is probably the right decision.
I don't know. Duolingo, I kind of like Duolingo.
Yeah.
It's surprisingly effective. It is very gamified, but I know what you're saying. And I also want to point out to just the whole community. I grew up in an era before computers and just having coaches stuff. And I wasn't used to having an app or a phone along with me, but I just want to point out, like, what do you think the future holds? Do you think we're going to use this data less? Of course, we're going to head more towards figuring out all the nuances and things you can tease out of seeing thousands of climbers. And AI is such a buzzword, and I don't want to even go down that rabbit hole. But just the idea is that with more data, more intelligent understanding of what to do with that data, we further our sport and tease out things that weren't available and weren't even grokkable because of the fact that a coach, maybe an experienced coach, only has experience with 12 athletes. And then when you get to take a step back and see 12,000 athletes and see it over time, you're going to learn things that you didn't see before. So I love that you guys are pushing in this direction because it has to happen. How could it not?
Yeah. And I guess the thing on that is as well is like, we're all climbers too. We are exactly the same as you. We're using it in exactly the same way. And like, I'm actually quite averse to having a phone with me the whole time when I'm training. I don't like it on the mats. I don't understand how people leave the iPhones just lying on the mat. Someone's going to stand on it. But like, in terms of collecting that information afterwards and going in and just having a quick check of what I could do that day makes a huge difference. And I don't train every day that I climb at all. At the moment, when I'm really busy at work, I train one day of the week and I do open climbing the rest of the day. But this is what we've built it around. We've built it around real people nudging in the right direction around lifestyles. But like you've just said, making the most of all the technology out there, because if we don't, we're going to be exactly in the same position we were 20 years ago. Or when I started. And the reason I started was men's health was pretty much the best source of information on training, and I couldn't get hold of anything to do with climbing particularly. And there were some great coaches out there. I'll definitely give them kudos, but we want to keep up with these other sports, and this is the movement, this is where we're going. So we're just lucky enough to have had the foresight to collect the data to put ourselves in that position. But it'll be a journey, and the first release is definitely step one. And those people that trust us, I'm pretty confident I can deliver for them. It might take some time, but I promise it'll be the best product they'll have ever used.
Well, you guys have been around for 10 years already, so that is a hint that you'll be around for quite a bit longer. And I've always been really vocal. I'm getting older in the sense of climbing years. I'm 39 now, and I started when I was probably 8 or 9, and I find that my generation is really tempted to denigrate new things like comp style movement. And, I hear all the time, they say, give me some steep crimp lines to train for outdoors. And then my retort is always, well, how come that comp kid that you can't do their problem, but they can do your problem? And, they go outside and they do just fine on any steep thing. And so just this continual embracing of what's next just goes in line with what you're saying, where I don't know if these climbers are actually stronger, but they sure are climbing harder. And so let's understand why that is. And it's not burying your head in the sand and saying, let's just do what we've always done. So I applaud just the continual push forward.
Yeah. And it's trying to make it work, like I said, just work for people as well. It's like what I said before about the difference in the levels of the past and the kids of the now. The kids of the now are very happy, contented people, which generally speaking, I'm generalizing here, and they are, they've got good lifestyles. They appreciate part of the hustle, but then having some kind of balance. The guys in the past, it was definitely like an all or nothing, like systemic, you got to grind it out. Whilst I think people can have it all. And like I work with people, become really good friends actually in terms of clients who own businesses. They have really demanding lives, but they consider themselves athletes. They want to be an athlete. That's an identity thing for them. And I think you can have it all. And you might not be the very, very best without complete commitment to one thing, but you can have a really, really good balance of everything. So using anything that it takes to get there is, just do it. Take the pressure off.
Okay, Ollie, I can't help but project into the future and dream about what you all might do when we're sitting here chatting about your 20-year anniversary. And I've seen you play around with, I think they're like force plates, this ability to measure on a hold or on a hangboard. But let's go into the more technical side of things. And I just always have this desire that we can better understand technique and bring it maybe to, gymnastics, where they say, no, we do this because it works, not just because it looks cool or whatever, but because it works. And I've always thought about this idea of force plates that provide instant feedback and really close that loop of, oh, you think you're putting weight on this foot. Well, like when you shifted like this, you can see that actually you went from putting 25 pounds to 28 pounds. And, maybe like the color of the hold changes, whatever the case may be. Do you guys have any ideas about the future and any cool stuff in that realm?
Yeah, we tried to make a force plate board where every hold had a force plate behind it. And pretty much without going too much into it, where the force kind of measured in terms of torque, the shape of the hold is very complicated. And I love the idea of it still, because I think by doing that, it gives immediate feedback without having to film. So I do think that is a really cool thing that could be done. However, I think because of the way that we're able to analyze movement from filming first, I think you could probably do the same. And I've been lucky enough to kind of push collaborators together in terms of from universities, in terms of data moving models, in terms of filming and projecting human movement with some of the board developers, or the people that sell all the training boards. I think boards is the first place to do that. And I think that could be the first jump forward. And yeah, I'm definitely getting my foot in the door there as well. So I think the key bit is understanding benchmarks and understanding movement patterns. Then the really unique selling point, or the really unique part, which is what we've always done with training, is making that applicable to the person, not just generic movement for 6 foot man. It's okay, what should this small female athlete, this extremely tall male athlete, tall female athlete, short male athlete, what should they do? And there's some really, really cool stuff happening behind the scenes, actually, which is, I constantly just try and hire or work with people better than me. And it's starting to get so far away from my intelligence level that I'm just nodding and smiling at this point, but I'm psyched to be in the room.
That's interesting. That can maybe just be done more from video analysis and understanding what that surface is that they were on. Like, boards assuming we're talking about standardized boards. And yeah, this is the part that's so tricky about technique, is that every body is different. And even then, if you had someone with the exact same dimensions, their predisposition of maybe they are better on their feet, or they have really strong ring fingers instead of pointer fingers, and then how that would suggest that they do the next move just is endlessly complex. But just like that big data set you guys have generated with training, you would think that something similar could be done just with movement. It might take another 10 years, but I'm just glad you guys are thinking like that.
Yeah. And the key bit is combining both, which I think is a bit everyone forgets, because like we said earlier, if you can't hold the hold, your creativity or options have diminished. There's actually, I think I can talk about this. There's a Red Bull event happening next year. It's going to be the World Climbing Series. And they will be doing, but I will be doing physical testing on their behalf with athletes prior to the competition. And the cool bit of like combining the two is the fact that you can look at an athlete, and people can do this right now, and you can look at two different athletes, say Yanya and another female competitor. You can look at their movement patterns, and all you have to do is record it, put a pin on the point on the screen, and get a program to tell you how much their hips have moved from side to side, and look at the acceleration and the distance. But when you know the difference between their finger strength and arm strength, you can see why maybe Yanya is having to move slower. She has time to think, whilst the others have to flick way faster. So not only do you predict movement patterns or help tell them, you can say, well, I'm stronger fingers. Can I get away with going slower? Or I've got stronger arms. And that's the unique point for me, which is what I'm trying to build in, is technique isn't just about movement. It's about understanding the prerequisites of the movement and what's allowed to happen.
Oh, that is fascinating, because then you start being able to pick out holes that need to get filled in strength that maybe weren't initially seen from metrics because of how they move. And it makes sense, because in some ways you could say that hanging from an edge is kind of climbing. It's just a very, very, very distilled version of what we're talking about. It's a snapshot. And then when you start taking a movie instead of just one frame, and understanding how they're interacting and using that strength and using their higher strengths versus their weaknesses to facilitate that specific movement, then you can start picking them apart and saying like, ooh, you need this.
Honestly, watch the World Cups and just look at one movement pattern, like really good female boulder 3 world champs final. I think it was boulder 3 going into a big undercut, slopey green thing.
Yes.
You can tell people's posterior chain and the method they had to use. And there was a technical element of speed, but you had far more time to react, and you could get away with a slightly worse position if needed to, with a stronger posterior chain. So we're not even just talking fingers. We're talking about, can they push into it? Yeah, there's so many examples of that. And you can tell if someone's slightly lighter frame and they're good with their fingers, as soon as the hold has got a slight incut to it, the whole dynamics of movement change. As soon as it's flat, they can't get away with it, and they have to go into a slightly different technical movement pattern. Everything I always do is all about building the playbook for the athlete. Me and Aidan Roberts talk about this all the time. So I've been building his playbook for 7 years now. You know exactly how to tip all these dials at the right point in his training and his recovery, all of that. But you get to do the same in the movement pattern. And, you know, if a hold is slightly more open, then it requires this part of your shoulder to be worked slightly differently. You need to have your hips lower. You need to do this because you're not strong enough in this position. If it's in cut, you get away with so much more. You can fire yourself into the wall. Yeah, I mean, I'm going off on one here, but
that's so
I'm
good.
thinking about it. I'm thinking about it. I'm working on it. It's going to be good.
You mentioned boulder number 3 at World Champs for the women. And I was thinking of boulder number 4, where it was a turnaround, a big dynamic move with the women ended up facing the crowd. And yeah, a lot of the women did do that move, but you really saw Yanya's stronger physical upper body. I'm not going to opine on the crimps or on the finger strength, but just her control through that dynamic range of motion that, you know, instead of it being a jump and latch into a kind of a bent arm iron cross, there was a bit more control in that one arm that gave her time to grab that next one, shift weight. And it just was really evident that her strength was on display there.
Yeah. I mean, she climbed up terribly, some of it, like those foot slips, she was cutting, and you're like, well, she can kind of get away with it. And actually I'm good friends with and working with is one of her setters who gets flown over to set. I think she did a video recently. I was asked about it, about not doing fingerboarding and stuff. And just to kind of touch that one, you don't have to do fingerboarding if you're having World Cup boulders set for you day in, day out, with the coaches pushing you onto crimps, pushing you on slopers, and you can deal with the workload of that. But yeah, Yanya has the prerequisite to have time to think, which changes her technique and movement patterns. If you look at different athletes, they don't have time, therefore they're more dynamic. I don't know, I've never tested Oriane. I think she's an amazing climber, but her movement style is so fluid. It's very French, and that's usually because they have strong fingers, but maybe not the same prerequisite shoulder strength. that's a theory. I don't know.
I would have that theory too from just armchairing it and watching it. And she had incredible showing in finals, and she flashed 3 boulders and then struggled with boulder number 4. And it was in that move that she struggled, and then completing it, she seemed to gas out after using the power that she had. And this is what's so fun about climbing, is watching her solve those problems differently. Just like you're talking about when Aiden has an in cut, he sure knows how to engage on in cut. And that's not to say he can't climb on other styles, but all of a sudden you have a different playbook. I like the idea of playbook and understanding what's in front of you and why you're going to move depending on the style that you are observing, that's pretty advanced there, Ollie.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the climb. I don't really ever think about it like this, but the climb's like an opposition team, isn't it? It's like you address the strategy, the tactics around what's in front of you, and knowing what you've got on your side. And there's so much scope in climbing to do that, which is why it's so cool. But again, if you get the basics right, you've done your fundamentals, you've got your prerequisites, you've got more room to move. And that's kind of been my job, is understanding what those are, get athletes up to a really good level, and then understanding what the athletes have at their limit.
Yeah, I think that's a good reminder of doing the basics, doing the fundamentals. It's one thing when you're out there, you're on a big holiday trip and you have your boulder or climb in front of you, and you just need to find your way up it. And yes, you love heel hooks, so you're just going to use that power that you have. But then you got to be able to take a step back and say to yourself, okay, in this scenario, I'm at home, I'm on my local crag, like maybe I need to explore a different movement pattern and just, take the ego out of it. So that's a good callback. Okay, Ollie, I know you have got the app coming out probably right around the time when this podcast comes out. Sounds like there's a special founder's ability for people who just want to hop in right away.
I'll definitely share the wait list. Pretty much the key thing is, if you get on the wait list, there's a limited number of spots, but not many people know about this. And if you trust us, you trust what we do, and you're willing to get in there early, like we'll lock down achieve, like I think it's something like 30% off for life, or more. So one, it means that, we'll thank you for trusting us on day one, and I can only promise it'll get better from there. But I'll share everything with you after the podcast.
Cool. I'll put something in the show notes. Yeah, I like this idea that just keeps getting better. When I think about my introduction to Lattice, a decade ago, and how you guys started, I just think it's so cool that you had that foresight, and that this is a natural outcry of building that data, building Ollie's brain into a database and how to use it, along with all the other coaches that have been using that for years. So very cool. Also excited for the next 10 years because it's just heading in a great direction.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm psyched too. And I mean, I'm not going to lie, it's been hard at times. I've loved the journey, and I never thought I'd actually be able to work this hard systemically. I thought I'd be a climber bum in the past, and I definitely have given it everything. And I feel like this is the way for me to achieve my goal, which is to just be surrounded by the best people in the industry and working with the best. And that's the thing that excites me the most, is going into a room and just debating with a bunch of people that are experts in their field, and then being able to share that, and just put cool stuff out there. So yeah, this feels like it's finally reached the epitome for me. So I'm psyched.
Your training work volume has gone up 10% every year. You can handle it. And I think that analogy of being around the smartest people you can be, hiring people that are smarter than you, is similar in climbing, where if you want to be the weakest climber in the group, as crazy as it sounds, it's a great way to get better.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, 100% agree.
Okay, Ollie, last question for you. And that's my classic one of, how do you go from good to great?
I was thinking about this one quite a lot, actually. So I think there's 2 parts to it in my mind, slightly dependent on your definition of great. But I think you have to be obsessed. You have to be willing to think about this thing all the time, you don't have to be completely single-minded. Like I said before, I think you can have balance, and have a family life and stuff, but you know when you're obsessed in something, those quiet moments, you think about it, you're prioritizing it in your week, you're scheduling these things in. And I do think to be great, you need to have that level of obsession. Now, the bit that I think is different is staying there or to become really great. So for my perception's changed over the years of great being on the international circuit, but realistically, like to be truly great, to be in the podiums, to be winning, to be consistent at that, you need to be resilient. And I don't think you can become great by being just resilient. And my definition for that is the speed in which you can get back to baseline. I think this is quite a few people have said this now online, which I really love the definition. If it's a bad circumstance, how quickly can you bounce back to your emotional baseline and your working baseline? If you have a really positive event, the same thing. So, like Olympic athletes that win gold, they have this huge, huge high and they usually have this big low afterwards. The ones that win multiple golds have the high, then they get back on the horse pretty quickly and they get used to that kind of cycle of being very emotionally stable. And it does come in, obviously there's certain occasions where it does become more exaggerated, but I think your resilience to those changes is what keeps you great and really defines the top level of people that actually stay at the top. So yeah, I guess my answer is obsession to get there, resilience to stay there.
That's really good. I find it really difficult on both the micro scale and the macro scale on resilience. It's really easy to fall or have a bad day on a project and just think like, I'm shit. I can't do this. And, really you just need to show up the next day and completely let go of whatever happened the day before. And as I've gotten older, I've gotten better at reducing my woe is me time after injuries, where, it used to be like, oh, I hurt my finger. Like I just, climbing isn't for me. I can't believe it. And, maybe you wallow for, 3 weeks or a month before you start just kind of doing the rehab that you need to do. And I find that the people who just can quickly get back to baseline, like you're saying, say, okay, well, what now? What do I do now? Okay. Like, let's move forward.
Yeah. And the reason why I say you can't get there with just that is ironically, the people that are really resilient, which you might not think about, are actually just extremely contented people. They go and do a bit of climbing. They're happy. They have a bad day. It doesn't make a big difference to their identity. They have a really good day. They don't get carried away with it. They don't go and try and do too much. But you can't just have that without the obsessive side as well. So I think if you can marry the two of not reading into stuff, being very contented in your identity and who you are, but then still being willing to put the thing first and obsessing over it, that's such a good attitude to have. And it's really hard won. And I think that really, really makes a difference. And I'm the same as you. I would say resilience for me has come from, I think, what was it? There's a difference between being able to just deal with the crap, like how good you are at staying under your baseline. That's a different thing altogether. It's like, I think I'm really good in that zone of just being able to deal with the slog and deal with the grind, not feeling good, trying really hard. That's different to going back to your baseline and feeling good and normal. And I think it's important for people not to confuse that of going, I'm psyched to my training, I'm obsessed over it, I feel terrible, but I'm going to push through. And workaholics get like this is like, this is part of the thing. But what's really going to make you long-term improve is being able to be in a stable position and get back there really fast. So yeah, I think if people can start instilling that and think about it, even just in that mindset, I think it makes a big difference.
I think a way to practice that in the day-to-day is really enjoying whatever it is you're doing. If you're on your project and you're not sending, but you're out there with your friends and you're having fun, or this is where sometimes I said earlier about quote unquote earning your training, is that when I'm not overtrained and I'm just obsessed with climbing, I really enjoy the mobility work. I enjoy all the quote unquote mundane because I don't know, it's something I'm there for and in the moment, and I'm not worried about how it's affecting my later self. I'm just there. And I think part of that leaning into obsession is leaning into each moment rather than just like, wow, it'll be so great when I can look back and say I did X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. And understand your baseline as well. Definitely. That's a big thing. It's like, what are you content with? And I think that's something I've spent a lot of time. I'm a improvement chaser, and I definitely try to push hard. And I think a lot of people probably relate to that. But like in terms of like, if you were to sustain it, what makes you happy? And that might be good days, bad days, but what's the ratio of those that you happy with? I think I've asked a lot of my athletes this. I've really worked on their values and understanding that. And that's, again, that all goes into these plans. It's kind of understanding what the right level is.
Good stuff, Ollie. Okay, we're talking about the obsessed. I think most people listening to this are obsessed, and the even more obsessed people are my Patreon subscribers who have a couple of little extra questions for you. And this first one is a classic. If you want to hear that Q&A and other extra behind-the-scenes content from this episode and others, head over to patreon.com/testpiece to sign up now. Patrons also get their episodes early and ad-free. There's hours and hours of bonus content there to help you on your own path of going from good to great. Still not sure? There's a free 7-day trial for you to check it out. And to help the show grow, please share this episode with someone who would love it. Okay, see you next week.